Yes. Thank you, Cosmin, for the introduction, and Parasite and its team for organizing this conference and for allowing me to take part in it as well. Particular shout out, I guess, to my colleagues who have all given, I think, very inspiring presentation in the past 2 days, and I'm honored to give the conclusion. I guess, yes, since this theater does not really have a souffleur over there, I will read my paper a bit as well. And also in reference to maybe, an expansion of the sort of definition of what an exhibition can be, just provided by Clara. I'd like to sort of maybe continue a bit on that trajectory. So today we are talking about the exhibition as a site for direct political action. I stress direct here, because it is indeed an important distinction between an exhibition or art as representation on the one hand, and art as activism and directed action on the other hand. I will return to the question of how useful such a distinction is. In my opinion, one of the most important elements in considering direct political action in exhibition making is to what an extent an exhibition can empower its participants, whether they be audience members, artists, or collaborators. And of course, to ask the question, what is the intent of this empowerment? What is the change we hope to produce? And can we look beyond this change as well, beyond the scope of a single event? Perhaps hovering in between activism and representation, I am interested in what conditions an exhibition can produce to act politically on this level, or to show politics for that matter. How are these conditions structured on a curatorial level, or concerning education, mediation, etc.? Well, it seems that these are enough questions for a 20-minute talk, so I better cut to the chase. I would like to talk about 3 possible directions, as it were. Number 1, the exhibition as a political stage, which sort of highlights the aforementioned question of representation. The second one, decentralization, or the art of spreading out, in order to talk about a spatial dimension of the exhibition as a political project. And thirdly, collaboration, or being the host versus the guest, which puts emphasis on social and institutional alliances. The case studies that I highlight are focused on the large-scale exhibition and the biennial in particular, with a focus on the recent biennials of Istanbul, Venice, and Budapest. Since time is short, I will hope this talk will do them at least some justice. Number 1, the exhibition as a political stage. I will add to the popularity of the Venice Biennial, it seems, in this conference. But maybe, it's also, I also like that we are discussing these exhibitions, because sometimes I also have the feeling that we see these biennials, we see this exhibition, there's very little time actually to have like a public discussion about it. So it's good maybe to approach from different angles. One of the things that struck me when walking through the main exhibition of the 56th Venice Biennial this year was the confluence of language traditionally used to describe dance, theater, or performance with the language of visual art. In the introductory text to the exhibition, Curator Okri and Weser repeatedly adopted words as stage, staging, choreography, duration, liveness, political theater, etc. And I believe he did so purposefully, as even in the 3 filters that Osei already discussed, which were indeed sort of proposed modes of looking at the exhibition, these filters were even geared towards his language of performance, and thus towards perhaps proposing the exhibition as a performative act, even though there were surprisingly few actual performances to be encountered or integrated into the exhibition, in my opinion. The exhibition is entitled All the World's Futures, as we know, hinting at a speculative mode of curating that would bring together an array of potentialities as to imagine a world beyond the horizon. Yet in fact, there was very little speculation going on. Rather, the biennial focused on putting forward a great number of positions through the work of even a larger amount of artists that mark contemporary moments and situations of crises all around the world. Osei already quoted part, actually, of what I'm going to quote, but for the sake of sort of completeness and clarity of my talk, I will re-quote. So to quote, the global landscape, this is from Enveser's, by the way, curatorial statement for the biennial. The global landscape again lies shattered and in disarray, scarred by violent turmoil, panicked by specters of economic crisis and viral pandemonium, secessionist politics, and a humanitarian catastrophe on the high seas, deserts, and borderlands, as immigrants, refugees, and desperate peoples seek refuge in seemingly calmer and prosperous lands. Everywhere one turns, new crisis, uncertainty, and deepening insecurity across all regions of the world seem to leap into view. End quote. Shortly after that, Enveser asks, quote, the principal question this exhibition will pose is this: how can artists, thinkers, writers, composers, choreographers, singers, musicians, through images, objects, words, movement, actions, lyrics, sound, bring together publics in acts of looking, listening, responding, engaging, speaking, in order to make sense of the current upheaval? I'm trying to make sense of that sort of enumeration, though. To continue quoting, what material, symbolic, or aesthetic, political, or social acts will be produced in this dialectical field of references to give shape to an exhibition which refuses confinement within the boundaries of conventional display models. In All the World's Futures, the curator himself, along with artists, activists, the public, and contributors of all kind, will appear as a central protagonist in the open orchestration of the project. End quote. Now, to trace these quotes back to something I mentioned before, namely the emphasis, if not insistence, on the language of performance, as is, I think, also very apparent in these two citations. Enveser envisions his biennial as a stage, although he indeed also references it as a parliament of forms, but a stage on which artistic, political, and social acts can unfold beyond the conventional framework of an exhibition, which is argued to be a confinement even. It can be argued, however, to which extent this biennial actually deviated from the traditional exhibition format. But in any case, the curator and all other participants, perhaps even the audience members, are claimed to be the protagonist in this theater play, if you will, to stick to the lingo. But was the exhibition able to produce the conditions for these acts to take place? And was the exhibition a mere representation of the crisis of today on a global scale, or did it act beyond that? And in this case, does the act of representation stand in the way of action? The potential of acknowledging the exhibition and its political stakes, claims, and objective as something inherently performative is very important in my opinion. In this, it sort of traverses and may unite representation and action. The Venice Biennial is not unique in this respect, for we have recently seen other biennials attempting to do the same, such as Artur Majewski's Berlin Biennial of 2012 or the Jogja Biennials. In a way, the refusal of the 2013 Istanbul Biennial to occupy the public forum during the Gezi Park and Taksim Square protest by sort of cancelling its public program was a declarational move in this respect as well. Yet to return to Venice, the act of performance or claiming the exhibition as being performative should go beyond the institutionalization of its language. It needed to have a deeper presence. Also, this exhibition demonstrated actually something that we've been discussing at some occasions during this symposium. The exhibition sort of demonstrated whether or not the traditional biennial is still the right format to make such political claims. Biennials in general are becoming more and more reliant on the art market to be able to commission new artworks. And this presence is actually sometimes painfully visible. And then there are those sponsorships and funding connections that altogether cannot see the light of day, which caused major controversy around the Sydney Biennial in 2014, and in fact was the reason of the 2013 Istanbul's biennial partial withdrawal. There is surely a sort of ambiguity here, as one wonders if Marx can still be read in Venice. Second part, decentralization or the art of spreading out. One condition or strategy, if you will, that characterizes many large-scale exhibitions and biennials today is decentralization. Naturally, to decentralize something or to take one or something out of the center can be a political act in itself, as it destabilizes, weakens, or even threatens something that was once considered unshakable or immovable as a center. In terms of curating biennials, decentralization often manifests as a spreading out of the exhibition in the urban context. This can be considered a political act, but is actually often informed by the issue of scale, exhibitions becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and thus spectacle as well. The infusion of scale as an element of the exhibition and sort of decentralization as a curatorial strategy was particularly noticeable in this year's Istanbul Biennial, which was entitled Salt Water, A Theory of Thought Forms, and curated by Carolyn Christopher-Karjev. The curator chose a similar approach to her documenta 13 in Kassel, in that both exhibitions used the infrastructure and fabric of the respective cities they were situated in as a way to organize and structure the curatorial framework. In Istanbul, artworks were spread out in various and remote parts of the city, thus encouraging people to decentralize their experience of the exhibition through the act of exploration. However, and that's a big however, there were but a few moments in which the location was actually pertinent to the content, political or otherwise, of the artwork itself. Perhaps we venture here into one of the core tasks of a curator, the organization and arrangement of space, which should actually be understood conceptually, politically, and physically. In the best possible scenario, the space in which an artwork is shown creates a sense of urgency and advances the understanding of the work, certainly if the work is made for the occasion of the exhibition, which is often the case with biennials. Whereas such an urgency, at least in a spatial sense, cannot always be accomplished in the museum, the biennial surely provides an opportunity to merge site specificity with political action. It seems a fine line then between using location or dislocation as a political gesture and spreading out as a production of spectacle. In Istanbul, I often felt I was taking a detour rather than being on a specific trajectory. Many of the locations were spectacular, I'll give you that, but did not really move beyond that. Surely this contributed to what Ana Pinto, in her Art Agenda review, described as the ah-ness of this exhibition. There's a moment, and then you move on. 3, collaboration or being the host versus the guest. A biennial is almost always the result of manifold collaborations between the artist and the curator, between the city and the institution, etc. But not often is collaboration made the very core of the project. In the spring of this year, the first ever off-biennial in Hungary was organized. Conceived through the lens of self-organization and collaboration, it was not affiliated with a single institution, but rather functioned as a coordinated structure. Its organization was a score, in a way, that brought together small institutions, independent spaces, theaters, and grassroots organizations that would perhaps normally not work together. The off-biennial worked not only to galvanize audiences, but also to build alliances between the collaborators in a time where public funding for contemporary art in Hungary was cut, and government-run institutions changed their programming through self-censorship. On that note, the biennial did not apply for any government funding, nor did it work in spaces that are run by the government. An exquisite corpse, it seems, can be born out of a situation of necessity. The result may have been a structured chaos, but the off-biennial foregrounds an interesting relationship between the host and being the guest. Biennials, by nature, play the role of a host. It welcomes the widest variety of invited guests, be it artists, participants, and of course not in the least audiences, to the city or the context where it takes place. This is in fact a very generous position, but it may also become habitual. The position of host becomes hard to maintain if the host never leaves the house. The guest, obviously, has a very different approach. I will not quote a book of etiquette here, but evidently the guest has a kind of responsibility to build and maintain a relationship with its host, in that broadening her or his horizon. The acceptance of hospitality is accompanied by a will to learn and an inclination to accommodate. In that sense, the off-biennial has a bit of a double identity. It acts as a guest in the houses of the partners it collaborates with, yet in the same move becomes the host that extends the invitation for others to join. Through approaching the biennial as a civil initiative that shows both the richness and fragility of an artistic and cultural ecosystem, off-biennial politicizes its collaboration method and thus the host-guest relationships within. Now, I do not want to romanticize the situation out of which the off-biennial emerged, nor do I deny the sometimes arduous nature of working together. Yet collaboration as a political act, direct or otherwise, and as demonstrated by the example of the off-biennial, is one that informs the very fabric of an exhibition. So I kind of share, I guess, everyone's obsession not to talk about their own work here. But of course, like the sort of directions of the exhibition as a political stage, decentralization and collaboration don't come falling out of the sky, because these topics very much inform our thinking about a documenta that takes place sort of partly simultaneously in Athens and Kassel. Especially like when you think about the proposal of Adam Simchik to, of course, like partly move Athens out of its host city, pertains to the topic of to sort of decentralize something and what that means for an exhibition that has a history like that of documentas. And I think in the proposal that was presented last year, I think what the proposer wants to argue as well is that, of course, when Documenta was established in 1955 in Kassel, it had a very particular urgency, of course. It also had the aim to like educate people and to reconnect Germany to the international avant-garde and to make up for past mistakes, obviously. And sort of through the ages, Documenta grew into being, well, a different exhibition than it was. And there's actually one sentence in the proposal that says, in Kassel, life is elsewhere. And that this was also like partly the reason to move Documenta to Athens, at least as a sort of temporary move. And I guess, that also changes the position radically because you're no longer the host anymore. You're a guest in another city, and not just any city, but a city that seems to be at the political foreground of several shifts that are happening in Europe and beyond as well. And in that sense, Athens is imagined as an actual geographical site where things unfold and where things happen, but maybe also as a sort of metaphorical entity in a way, even though that's a very bad word, I think, but as a metaphor for South. And like the concept of South, I think, is incredibly important to this Documenta in particular, and also how North-South relationships play out on, let's say, a European stage, but also on a global stage. And of course, being the guest in another city, you could sort of choose two directions. You could say, okay, we're going to build Documenta sort of from the ground up in Athens, but in a way that would be rather silly, of course, because Athens already has a very rich artistic and cultural infrastructure. So it makes much more sense to engage with the people who are already there and sort of the institutions of sort of various natures to sort of, make Documenta part of the fabric of a city rather than building something new. So at the moment, there's a lot of conversations going on with people and with institutions and site in Athens to see sort of also in what way Documenta can be perhaps a stage for those institutions to make a statement or to move on, because as you well know, it is not an easy survival at the moment in that city as an artistic institution. And sort of maybe because then I really will stop talking about what I'm doing now, like the exhibition as a performative structure I think is something that is very important to me at this moment, also coming from performance in a way, but certainly if you conceive of an exhibition that takes place in two cities where, let's say, a lot of the visitors might not be able to visit both sites in a way, and sort of adding to that a part of the exhibition will take place simultaneously, there's always this feeling of time and perhaps of loss as well. And I think that concept of loss and that concept of simultaneity, and perhaps also sort of Kassel coming after Athens as a kind of echo. And I don't mean this in a kind of hierarchical meaning, but an echo as something else, are of course extremely performative notions and something that we build the exhibition on, and also hope to like redefine what an exhibition can be and how it sort of unfolds in time. Okay, I'll speak more later this week actually about Documenta, but I guess in terms of Documenta going south, so to speak, it might be appropriate to leave you with a quote that was recently sent to me by a friend. It does not give away too much, I say that. The message was inspired by a lucid dream that Virginia Woolf had after seeing a play by Aristophanes. So enjoy the birds. And I will leave you to this. Thank you for your attention.